Good afternoon. My name is Chris Clark, and I'm the director for the Strategic Program Development Organization at the Y-12 Nuclear Security Complex. And I'd like to welcome everybody to the brown bag luncheon we've got today, which is sponsored by the Institute for Nuclear Security. The INS is a consortium of federal and educational institutions here in the area, comprised of University of Tennessee Baker Center, where we're having this luncheon, Oak Ridge Associated Universities, Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and the Y-12 Nuclear Security Complex. That's a unique set of resources for the nation that are all located within just a few miles of each other. Hence, we've set up the Institute for Nuclear Security to provide resources to the nation for our national security and nuclear security activities that go on. Today we've got Terryann Nelson speaking to us on foreign research reactor activities. Terryann is the Nuclear Material Applications Manager within the Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Global Security Programs at the Y-12 National Security Complex. She's a graduate of UT, so she does bleed orange. She has a BS in chemistry. In her career, she started out at the Analytical Chemistry Laboratory working at Y-12, doing material characterization. She specialized in gas chromatography and mass spec work. During her tenure, she's held positions in the Quality Assurance Organization as a manager, mixed waste characterization, analytical program manager, and a lab operations manager. And she's done quite a bit of work for others, which is work for other federal agencies, other entities. And as you see in her presentation, she bounces all around the globe dealing with nuclear materials. In 2000, she joined the nuclear non-proliferation world, dealing with the highly enriched uranium disposition program. And she helped develop, manage, and downblend high enriched uranium for the disposition of material for peaceful uses. In 2007, she became the Foreign Research Reactor Program Manager responsible for managing the uranium supply and/or return contracts all around the globe. In 2013, she assumed the Nuclear Material Applications Manager role, which covers the foreign research reactors, global threat reduction activities, and dealing with new research reactor fuel and advanced fuels for transitioning of reactors from high enriched to low enriched. Terryann and her husband live in West Knoxville. She's an avid tennis player. She's a 4.5, and I think you won the Nationals one time, right? No. We'll say she did, because she is a really good tennis player. She's a proud mom and her two sons just graduated from UT with highest honors. One has a master's in education. The other one has a bachelor's degree in business with supply chain management as a major. One of the things she'd like to accomplish in life is to get both her sons employed and out of the house. So, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Terryann Nelson.
All right, can you hear me? All right. Well, and on that last note, actually, my older son yesterday was just offered a job teaching at South Carolina Middle School, and he accepted, so thank goodness. Anyway, all right, well, today I'd like to talk to you about how Y-12 supports the world's research reactors and a little bit about the history. Let's see if I get this. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a historical background. Most of you, if you're from this area, you probably know it, but I'm going to tie it into how it applies to the Foreign Research Reactor Program. I'm going to talk a little bit about the policies that were established, and then I'll talk about and I refer to it as the FRR program. It's easier to say than Foreign Research Reactor. I'll talk a little bit about, at Y-12, how the LEU supply process works. and then a little bit about how the material is produced. I'll talk a little bit about the quality of the material because that's an important aspect of meeting the research reactor requirements. And then I'll speak a little bit about the Nuclear Security Summit support that I was directly involved with at Y-12, and then I'll provide a summary. So as you know, the history of Y-12 is built starting in 1943 as part of the Manhattan Project. And the uranium, the enriched uranium that was used in the little boy atomic bomb that helped end World War II was produced at Y-12. The little boy was dropped in Hiroshima, Japan on August 6, 1945. And then after a few days, another bomb was dropped, the Fat Man. And at the same time, the Russians invaded one of the Japanese puppet states in China. And at that point, as you know, Emperor Hirohito decided, okay, I guess we better surrender. And so on August 15th of that year, he did. Well, after World War II ended, as you know, the Russians and others were trying to pursue developing atomic weaponry also. And in fact, Russia was very successful, and by July of 1953, had successfully tested a couple of bombs. So there was a huge concern in the United States about the proliferation of atomic weapons. And so it was decided that something needed to be done to harness this new form of energy. So on December 8, 1953, Dwight D. Eisenhower gave the infamous Atoms for Peace speech, where he said that the United States pledges before you and therefore before the world its determination to help solve the fearful atomic dilemma, to devote its entire heart and mind to finding the way by which the miraculous inventiveness of man shall not be dedicated to his death, but consecrated to his life. And so his speech ushered in the Atoms for Peace program, which was to promote the peaceful uses of atomic energy. So what were some of the policies that were put in place to help support this attempt to harness the atomic energy? It first began in 1946 with the Atomic Energy Act, and it established the Atomic Energy Commission, which eventually became the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Department of Energy. And then there was the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, where it was declared this was the policy for peaceful uses of atomic energy. It actually stated that the development, use, and control of atomic energy shall be directed so as to promote world peace, improve the general welfare, increase the standard of living, and strengthen free competition in private industry. So the Atoms for Peace programs assisted foreign countries with peaceful applications of nuclear energy in exchange for a commitment that they would forego any nuclear weapons development work. Between the 1950s and the 1970s, the U.S. supplied highly enriched uranium to fuel research reactors in over 41 countries around the world. In 1978, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Act was established, and it established controls and limits on nuclear technology, and it also stated and declared that the U.S. would be a reliable supplier of nuclear materials for the countries that had committed to not pursuing proliferation efforts, and that those that did not impact the defense of the United States and the national security of the United States. Also in 1978, the program called the Reduced Enrichment for Research and Test Reactors, the RERTR program, was established, and the United States supported efforts around the world to reduce the enrichment of these research reactors that were initially established using highly enriched uranium to be able to convert them to use low enriched uranium, something less than 20% U-235, in order that that material would be less proliferable and not be able to be used in nuclear weapons. So today, DOE continues to act as a reliable supplier of enriched uranium. for both research reactor fuel and also for targets that are used for medical isotope production, which is a very hot topic around the world these days. And the RERTR program has made significant progress working with domestic and international research at isotope production reactors to convert them from HEU to LEU. So, the Foreign Research Reactor Uranium LEU, Low Enriched Uranium Supply Program, supports the Department of Energy and the National Nuclear Security Administration in supplying LEU metal at less than 20 weight percent for the foreign research reactor community. Now, this LEU is produced by downblending surplus U.S. origin highly enriched uranium. What does surplus mean? Well, in 1995, President Clinton declared that approximately 174 metric tons of highly enriched uranium were declared surplus to the national security need. And this is, after the end of the Cold War, it was determined we didn't need to have quite the stockpile that we had built up. And then in addition, in 2005, approximately 200 metric tons of HEU were declared excess to the national defense purposes. So there were lots of efforts underway to identify where that material needed to go after it was downblended. And approximately 22 metric tons of that material were designated for domestic and foreign research reactor fuel and targets. Just a note, as the end of March of 2014, over 142 metric tons of that surplus/excess HEU have been downblended. The majority of that material has been downblended to less than 5% and has been used for commercial nuclear power, not for research, necessarily for research reactors. But of that material, approximately 4.7 of that metric tons of that HEU were used for the research reactor needs. And out of that 4.7, approximately 11.7 metric tons of LEU have been produced, and we've delivered about 9.8 metric tons of that over the years since 1995 to the foreign research reactor customers. So this program supports several non-proliferation commitments that the U.S. government has made. For example, the surplus HEU disposition program, the record of decision for the material that was downblended was twofold. One, to make it non-weapons usable, and also to recover the value of that material to the extent possible. And I'll speak to that in a little bit. And again, the RERTR program, which said that the United States needed to be a reliable and cost-effective uranium supplier for the research reactors that were converting to LEU or had already converted to LEU. The program also supports some other important programs. The Global Threat Reduction Initiative program, as I told you, between the 50s and 70s, HEU was delivered to over 41 countries around the world. Well, in the effort to try to secure that HEU that might still be out there, this program was set up to help bring that material back to the United States. So we support that program, as well as for the reactors that converted to low enriched uranium. There's the FRR Spent Nuclear Fuel Acceptance Program. And in that program, the spent fuel is returned to the Savannah River plant down in Aiken, South Carolina. And so that the research reactors don't have to disposition the spent fuel on their own. And there's a similar program with Russia, the Russian Research Reactor Fuel Return Program. Same thing, the spent fuel for the reactors that were Russian origin, that material got returned to Russia. But one of the incentives for reactors to convert or to remove their HEU was that they could exchange the value of that HEU, the economic value after the HEU might be recovered, and exchange it for LEU credits under a supply contract within NSA. So that has been a successful process for many countries. In addition, there was the American Medical Isotopes Production Act of 2012. There, over the past several years, at times been various shortages of the medical isotope well, actually, the isotope is technetium-99, but it's produced from molybdenum-99, which is created in the research reactor. And part of the American Medical Isotopes Production Act was to reduce the use of HEU in these targets for medical isotope production. And we support that program also. So, how is this material supplied? Well, the NNSA is authorized to sell uranium to certain entities. Most of the statutes were set up in the Atomic Energy Act of 1954 as amended. For example, we are only allowed to sell uranium to countries that have an agreement for cooperation for the peaceful use of nuclear materials, nuclear energy, or the country, there may not be an official agreement for cooperation between the two governments, but for a specific purpose, for a specific research reactor, working with the International Atomic Energy Agency, there's a possibility of doing a project and supply agreement where IAEA and the U.S. government and the country who is wanting the material for their research reactor come to some agreements, most of which are that they agree to have the physical protection requirements that are needed to possess this U.S. origin enriched uranium. Also, one of our other authorizations is that there was the United States Enrichment Corporation Privatization Act of 1996. And in that, it said that the U.S. government could sell uranium to entities that were nonprofit, that were state organizations, such as other foreign governments, educational institutions, for the peaceful uses of the nuclear material. So kind of what is the process? So we deal with entities similar to the Department of Energy in these other countries. For example, there's the Argentinian Nuclear Energy Commission. There's the Japan Atomic Energy Agency. And so the contracts are actually sales contracts between NNSA, and they're administered out of the NNSA Y-12 production office, and these other entities. And so how do we find out that these research reactors need material? Well, through the research reactor community is a small community. Typically there are 2 international conferences held each year where most of those research reactor customers go to. And we from Y-12 are represented there, and we find out, oh, we're going to be building a new research reactor, or, oh, we're running out of fuel, we need some more LEU. So they submit an expression of interest to us, specifying what their enriched uranium requirements are, what quantities, what time frame, who their fuel fabricator might be. And based on that information, Y-12 will provide a cost proposal. And as a point of fact, the proposal includes the cost for Y-12 to produce that material. Okay, and I'll go through the process of how we produce it in a moment. But also, like as I mentioned earlier, one of the things was to recover the economic value of that material. Because back in the day, to enrich that material to above 20% took a lot of effort, resources, money, time. And so there is a way to value that material based on the separative work unit and the uranium cost for the feed material if we had to enrich that material today up to the less than 20% quantity. That uranium value, when the customer pays at the end after the material is delivered, the Y-12 portion gets returned to Y-12 because we're a government agency, we're full cost recovery, right? But the uranium value, those dollars go back to the United States Treasury. And I don't think many people realize that. In fact, in fiscal year 2013, approximately $13 million will return to the U.S. Treasury. So it may not, I don't know how much it would cost today to enrich up, if we were starting today, but at least the U.S. is recovering some of the economic value that was put into making that material to begin with. So after the customer says, yay, verily, we love your price, and being as how we are the only supplier of enriched uranium in the United States, they kind of have a captive audience. I mean, we have a captive audience. One of the other suppliers, of course, is Russia. And we typically, at this point, aren't competing with them. They pretty much supply their own research reactors and some of the former Soviet Union country research reactors. So we prepare a contract, and so as the program manager, I work with the technical people at the research reactors, and we go negotiate the technical requirements of the material that they need, and I identify if there are any legal issues or contracting issues, and I bring those back to NNSA Y12 to discuss with the contracting officer and the general counsel. Usually simultaneously, an export license application. You just can't ship enriched uranium out of the United States. It requires a U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission export license. And depending, sometimes those are submitted from the NNSA Y12 office, and sometimes the customer delegates that responsibility to their transportation agent who submits the application to the NRC. We coordinate the transportation logistics, finalize the contract, get the issued export license, and then we are able to deliver as we've arranged to the customer or to their fuel fabricator. Here's just a listing of some of the countries that we have supplied you the LEU for. Pretty much all the continents except for Antarctica. Some of the material has not been recent, it was maybe back in the 80s. Or as part of the RERTR program, material was shipped to, there was a fuel fabricator in Europe called Areva Serca. And so most of the European research reactors use them as their fuel fabricator. So there was a time when the LEU was shipped to the fuel fabricator, and as the United States government was working with other countries and getting them to convert their reactors to LEU, they would use some of that LEU that was already at the fabricator in France to fabricate the fuel for these countries that converted their research reactors. Now, how do we know how much LEU we're going to need? Well, working with these customers through the years, we forecast what their needs are going to be for either for their fuel based on their usage and or for medical isotope production. And based on what their projected quantities are and what time frame that they need the material delivered, we establish a production schedule at Y12 to meet that demand. But our objective is to maintain an on-the-shelf inventory to meet the customer orders more efficiently and to make the processing more efficient. And so this is just an example of how we do it. The bars across the bottom, for example, represent different customers that we might have, and the approximate quantity of material that they would need and what time frame they would need to have it delivered. The pink or fuchsia bar at the top lets me know what the available inventory is. And so, for example, there in the month of July, you see there was a huge drop of approximately 500 kgs in our inventory. It's because we made a delivery, or a couple of deliveries in that time frame, equaling 500 kgs. But then subsequently, we prepared more material, and so our inventory went back up. So this is a tool we use to determine what our supply and production process needs to be. What is that production process? Well, we take the HEU that's been identified as being surplus and excess, and get it out of storage and combine it with either depleted uranium or natural uranium. We size reduce it, and then we make up the batch to get to the less than 20% enrichment. And then we do a melting, a vacuum induction furnace melting of the material to make them less than 20%. We sample that material. Each batch is sampled and characterized to make sure it meets specifications. And then we size reduce it, and it's cast into a hollow log, a right annular cylinder, and that's because it's a critically safe geometry, and so we can store that log in that form. And as the customer's orders are placed, we then take it out of storage, and then we break and shear it into small irregular shaped broken metal pieces, and then we can it. per the customer's requirements for how much they want per can. We verify that we have all the documents needed to ship. And before it goes out the door, our quality assurance makes sure it meets the specifications. And we have the export license. We get authorization from our export control officer, making sure we're not shipping outside of the confines and the restraints of the export license. And then it ships out on July 12th. So just to show you a few pictures there, in the upper left is a picture of one of the right annular cylinders. And then there's a pan of the broken metal. It's very irregular shape. And typically, the size of the material we ship is anywhere between 80 grams and 300 gram size pieces. Okay. And here is a picture of one of our material handlers loading one of the cans into the shipping container. And then there's two of our loaded shipping containers being loaded onto the truck to ship out. In the United States, we can ship the LEU via commercial exclusive use transports, but typically the customer is responsible for hiring the transport company. We just make it ready and available to them to pick up at the dock at the White Pearl Shipping and Receiving Facility. So I mentioned the White Pearl quality of our material, and the fortunate thing about it, because it's made from downblended weapons-grade uranium, it typically has very low impurities. And there was a concerted effort to try to make a unified specification for enriched uranium for research reactors. And there was a ASTM specification that was prepared in the C1462. The thing is, it allowed for the specifications to cover material that might be from reprocessed uranium. So it allowed for high levels of activation products, transuranics, U-236, things like that. And so for a lot of the research reactors, they couldn't take the material for the purposes that they needed the fuel performance. They couldn't do that. So Y-12 developed a standard LEU metal specification. And it was not based on the material that we used to start with. It was based on a combination of all of our customer specifications. And so we would take the most restrictive requirement from any of our customers and make that our specification. And that allowed us to be able to pre-process material. As long as it met our LEU spec, we knew it would meet any of our customers' specifications. And that way we could more efficiently produce the material. And as I said, we like to keep it on the shelf inventory. That way we could pre-process it and have it ready to go and not have to wait until the customer placed an order and then have to go make the material to meet that particular spec. But I just wanted to show you a quick comparison to the ASTM spec from the Y-12 spec. And some of the areas, like I mentioned, the U-236, the ASTM spec allowed 40,000 micrograms per gram uranium to be in there. Ours, we have 4,600 as the spec. Transuranics, again, the ASTM was at 250 becquerels per gram U, and our spec is 100. Another one that, and it's a huge thing, is the carbon values. The ASTM spec allowed 800 micrograms per gram U, and our spec is at 350. And that helps for some of our customers tremendously. There is one element, I think I have it on there, is dysprosium. That's the only one where our value is higher than that, and it has to do with our detection limits for it. It's not because our material can't meet that. So as I said, the impurities, we total impurities is less than 1,200 micrograms per gram U, and ASTM less than 1,500. Another important characteristic for specifications is the equivalent boron content. So research reactors don't want those elements that are similar to boron because it poisons the fuel and makes it not as efficient. And in this case, our EBC is called maximum is 3 instead of 4. So how has this helped? Well, the standardization has allowed us to have more efficient operations and much more cost-effective production. We can do our preparation and campaigns for down blending, perhaps when other workload is low, and so it makes it much more efficient, as well as allowing us to have that on-the-shelf inventory. It allows for the simpler quality control checks at the end. If our quality people have one set of specs to compare against the material that we're shipping, much more efficient, there's no questions about it. And it allows us to respond quicker to our customers' orders. Now, I mentioned the material that we make is irregular shaped broken metal pieces, okay? And so first, to help optimize production, it would help if we had a uniform product form, and we're pursuing that. One example is a form that is cast that's called affectionately a gumdrop. It's approximately, it's a little bigger than a gumdrop, but it has that shape. But it's like 180 grams, and so that would be a much more uniform size shape. We're continuing to work on that effort. Also, that would reduce the material handling, because if you've got a pan of material of various sizes, it's very time-consuming to pick out and make sure you're picking between 80 and 300 grams, right? Okay, and it improves the packaging efficiency, because if everything is the same size, you know, you can put X number of those in a can this size and X number in a can this size. It makes it much more efficient. Now, we also for some small R&D efforts, are able to produce oxides, LEU oxides, plates, casting plates instead of the cylinder. And we also are pursuing efforts to develop capability to produce atomized metal powder. Now, most of the focus of what I do is on the foreign research reactor supply, but we also are working and we supply LEU for the domestic research reactors. There are over 13 that have converted to using LEU, and right now there are still 5 research reactors in the United States that still use HEU. But Whitewell is very active in developing, working with NNSA to develop an LEU molybdenum fuel to help. It has the higher neutron flux that those reactors need. And we're very active supporting that. One of the other things on the oxides is that we recently dusted off the old process that we had for producing uranium dioxide. And if you're a materials person or you understand about uranium dioxide, it's very reactive. So you have to make it such that it doesn't react with air, or it'll convert back to the more stable oxide, which is uranium U3O8. Uranium oxide. And so we recently were able to produce material that's going to be used to fabricate fuel pins for a reactor, and it's called the slowpoke reactor. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. Slowpoke is an acronym for Safe, Low Power Critical Experiment, and critical spelled with a K. Go figure. But anyway, and the actual designer and fabricator will be the Atomic Energy of Canada Limited in Canada, who will produce the pins, but the uranium dioxide is produced at Y12. It just so happens that reactor is currently, that's going to be converted using the LEU pins, is located in Kingston, Jamaica. So it's the Jamaican slowpoke reactor. All of us are trying to justify why we need to go down to make sure that the conversion is successful. As I mentioned, we also support the Nuclear Security Summit. And in fact, in 2012, there was a joint statement among the United States, Belgium, France, and the Republic of Korea, or South Korea, in helping the development of low-enriched fuel for the European research reactors that are left that need to convert to LEU. And as part of that joint statement, the United States government committed to supplying the feed uranium material to South Korea who has a patented process for making atomized metal powder. In this picture, the conical piece of equipment standing behind us is actually their atomizer. And so Korea committed their free of service, free of charge. They alloyed that uranium with molybdenum and used their atomizer to make the atomized metal powder. And their objective then was to complete that before the 2014 Nuclear Security Summit, which was just recently held in the Netherlands. I was very fortunate to get the opportunity to go over there in January. They wanted to celebrate that they had completed their commitment to the 2012 Nuclear Security Summit commitment. And as you can see, the translation to English isn't as smooth as perhaps we would expect, but this was the ceremony marking the delivery of UMOLY powder on implementing 2012 NSS action plan. And that is Dr. Jean-Mon Park. And I wasn't supposed to be in the pictures, but he said, no, he said, because it's coming from my facility to your facility, so I want you in that picture. So I was very, very honored. So in summary, I just wanted to let you know that of the material in fiscal year 2013, which ended at the end of September, we safely and securely delivered over 1,200 kgs of low-enriched uranium to 11 different FRR customers and 9 separate deliveries. And we supply over 80% of the non-Russian origin research reactors around the world. This is perhaps something you didn't know that Y12 was involved in. I wanted to make sure you knew about it. We continue to support the non-proliferation objectives of the U.S. government, and that we are committed to remaining to be a reliable and cost-effective uranium supply program for the global research reactor community. I thank you for your attention. Appreciate you taking the time out from your busy day and coming to listen to this. I'll be happy to answer any questions or try to answer questions. Yes, sir.
As you know, U.S. utility fuel for oxide is limited to 5% enrichment.
Correct.
But there's been talk about going to somewhat higher enrichments to go for longer burn-offs, and perhaps new claddings would allow you just to burn more fuel more efficiently. And right now, there's no enrichment plan, at least in the U.S., that's true to produce above that. If a utility wanted to make a lead test assembly to test some of this material, would they be able to go to Y12 and say order something that's between 5 to 10% in the form of oxide?
Well, not directly, because one of the things in our authorizations to sell uranium, it's for non-commercial purposes. Okay. Now, the LEU that we had that was down-blended to less than 5%, that could go commercial. Okay. But anything above 5%, we are not authorized to sell commercially without Secretary determination that it doesn't significantly impact the uranium industry and other things.
Ma'am, you mentioned that Russia is another supplier. Are there any other suppliers other than Russia in the United States?
Not, there may be some of the fuel fabricators who have scrap material left over from some of their fabrication manufacturing campaigns that they might sell small quantities to to university research reactors that use very, very small quantities. But again, that's not from enriched material, it's from scrap material. Very, very small quantities are done that way, but the major suppliers are only us and Russia. Yes, sir.
In the shipments, how closely do you track that they end up where they're supposed to end up?
Very closely. Very closely. I think the United States learned their lesson from all the HEU that was shipped out as part of the Happens for Peace program, and there's a concerted effort to identify if there's any of that still out there, where it is, how it's being protected. As you know, there's huge concern about that. So as we ship this material, and so one of the conditions in the contracts is that it is for a specified use. So if this material is for the Osiris reactor in Saclay, France. It can only be used for fuel for that reactor. Even if they decided, oh, well, we want to maybe do targets and use that material to make targets, they have to come back to the United States government and ask for a subsequent arrangement to use that material for any other purpose. Same thing, if they would want to sell any excess material that they had to anybody else, they have to come back to the U.S. government and request that. And so we monitor it that way. So, behind you first.
Has all the down blending been done at Blackwell?
For the research reactors, yes. For the material that was downblended to less than 5%, most of that was done at Nuclear Fuel Services up in Irwin, Tennessee, and or at B&W Lynchburg, at their facilities, and or at the Savannah River plant in HK, depending on what the material was.
In the overall scheme of things, is there any time frame when the country may need to do enrichment again, even whether it's 5% or 20 or high numbers?
Yes, headquarters is looking at that on an annual basis. From the research reactor, we provide what the forecasts are for the out years, and then they compile that with all the other needs for LED for various purposes, and are evaluating the need for future, either declaration of additional HU out of the stockpile or development of domestic enrichment capability or what, and that's being evaluated. They look at that each year and see what the projections are for the current declarations and how far out that material will last. And we update our forecast on a yearly basis.
And can you comment on the status of the American centrifuge effort?
No, sir, I'm not knowledgeable of their status. Yes, sir.
You said that Savannah River reprocesses the steel that comes back from these foreign research reactors. Do they also recover costs from the...
I assume they have to, I don't know that for a fact, but I just want to clarify, they don't reprocess the material, they dissolve it and downblend it to less than 5%. They don't recover it as HEU. There's a separate process that they do, that after they dissolve it, then they blend it and downblend it to less than 5%. There's a program with the Tennessee Valley Authority that a lot of that material went to for fuel for Browns Ferry and for Sequoia.
Can I make a clarification to the first question? And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but because there is no commercial fabrication capabilities for material greater than 5%, we could work with a customer to do greater than 5% material, because we wouldn't be competing. We wouldn't be competing. at
Right,
that
because there's no other.
point. If it was
that's the other
below
thing for big
5%,
governments.
we
can't
would be
compete.
competing with commercial fuel fabrication, so private industry, which we cannot do. So,
Correct. If we're,
so if authorized through Office of Nuclear Energy, NNSA, the fuel was being test fuel that was for research-related purposes, we could support, an entity that wanted to make greater than 5% material for fuel.
correct.
Are your slides available?
No, I am not able to distribute the slides.
Any questions?
So I certainly again thank you all for your attendance and attention, and I hope you have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend.